You have no responsibility in the fact that your child has an addiction. Think about addiction prevention like you would think about fire prevention. That would be like saying you can parent your way out of your kid having a shrimp allergy. And the fastest two-word definition for addiction is can't stop.
This is the Bad Mom Podcast, Parenting the Anxious Generation.
Hi, Chris Doyle.
Hi, Vivian.
Welcome to the Bad Mom Podcast. I am so excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. I am, you are this very unique bird out there. And when I talk to people, I've talked to so many people now about the Bad Mom Podcast, about my experiences, about what motivated me to start this. And I always talk about this interventionist that we brought in and whom I worked with. And I would love if you could just tell us a little bit about what is an interventionist? What is your role? And then I want to hear a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you for asking me to come on. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. As far as the interventionist, what that person's role is helping a family navigate a loved one's addiction, ideally for the purpose of getting their addicted loved one to accept help, where otherwise their addicted loved one is resistant and maybe defiant and in denial, in delusion. And all of that is, of course, by definition, what addiction looks like. Anybody that struggles with an addiction, the two main delusions that they have is I don't have a problem and I don't need any help. So facing that kind of resistance, most families then arrive at the conclusion as they have multiple conversations and make multiple attempts to be helpful, and find no success. They feel discouraged, and as if there's no way to get through to them, there's nothing we can do, and then they arrive at the big kind of misconception conclusion that there's nothing you can do to help someone who struggles with an addiction. And thankfully, there are interventionists who exist. And for a family like yours but a small percentage of families who become open or receptive to, well, maybe there is some other way. Maybe there is something that we can do. Maybe it does just look like what we've attempted so far wasn't going to be effective because you learn this after the fact. But with addiction, it's an entirely different game. So what you have to do to deal with addiction is kind of a completely different set of circumstances than just typical, ordinary, our child has a problem that we need to deal with. It doesn't respond in the same way. And so, but once you know that, then an interventionist just kind of guides you on how to have a more effective conversation that'll get you the outcome you're after, which is ultimately, I want to help my child.
Yeah, but I think that from our vantage point, what you brought to the table when we were going through so much as a family and with our own kid was that objectivity. And it's sort of where the whole Bad Mom Podcast comes from. The whole name is Bad Mom Podcast, Parenting the Anxious Generation, is that I felt like I was doing everything wrong because I wasn't getting the outcome that I so desperately wanted, which was for my kid to be happy, to understand that they were facing an issue and a predicament, to want to take part in their own well-being and self-care, et cetera. And I think that the unique vantage point that you brought was, forgive me for saying this, you were like, Vivian, you're listening to a lot of shit. You're talking to somebody who does not want to change and who doesn't want to deal with what's going on. And you gave us And we were so afraid of pushing him away farther, which I think so many people probably are, like, oh, if I do this, if I set those boundaries, which I think is such a huge part of what we need to talk about, and not intuitive. I mean, setting boundaries is not intuitive when you have a kid who's in a lot of pain. But I think that you gave us the courage to, I think I want to say, pull back the bullshit, and to see what was really going on, and how, on purpose or inadvertently, our kid was gaslighting us in some ways. And I think that a lot of people face that there. And you can tell me a little bit more about it, but what you did for us to be able to hold the boundary and to be super clear was invaluable. I will never, ever forget, and I will never, and I have so much gratitude for the role that you played, because we're in a completely different place now as a result of it, which I didn't see as possible in that moment. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you have a background as a firefighter, you faced your own issues, and kind of what got you here, and then what's your model? What are the modules that you use in order to do this work that you do?
Yeah. All right. So a lot to unpack there. So I started drinking and using drugs when I was 15, 16 years old, which is a pretty late start by my neighborhood standards. A lot of my peers had already started drinking at keg parties, probably at 8th grade graduation parties. And the reason I had that late start was probably a healthy fear that came from both of my parents being people who were in recovery from addiction already. And so I had some semblance of an idea of the possibility that drinking could be a problem before I ever did it. Having said that, it didn't stop me. It just kind of it delayed me, if anything. Once I started, I struggle with alcoholism and addiction. And that's just a thing that, means that there's something that happens to me when I put this substance in my body. There's a reaction, and that reaction is a craving for more. And then my brain starts to very quickly work on me to convince me that I don't have a problem. And so the denial becomes standard for anybody who then has an addiction. But if you notice, it didn't take me a lot of consequences or a lot of quantity or a lot of use cases before I became an alcoholic. I was essentially alcoholic from the very start. And so the advantage, in my upbringing, and I think to what your point is in saying, like, I feel like a bad mom, if I were to point out what one of my mother's advantages was, is that she never made herself responsible for the fact that I had alcoholism. It wasn't ever a matter of something that she did wrong or something that she did or didn't do. It had absolutely nothing to do with her. And she understands that at a fundamental basis because she was someone who struggled with alcoholism herself. And by the time I was 17, my mother already had over 20 years of her own recovery. So for any moms and parents who are listening, you got to let yourself off the hook, because you have no responsibility in the fact that your child has an addiction. Think about addiction prevention like you would think about fire prevention, right? There's fire prevention to prevent fire, right? But does anybody actually think that if you have fire prevention methods in place, that means that you're guaranteed to not have a fire? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So the fire prevention is actually more accurately fire detection. It's early detection and it's early mitigation. It's about getting to the problem early. It's like, let's deal with this when it's still smoke, not when it's a 5-alarm blaze. And so when you're dealing with addiction, the only thing that can kind of hurt you as a parent is being completely oblivious to the fact that it's a possibility, that you think that you're going to parent your way out of the possibility of it happening. That would be like saying you can parent your way out of your kid having a shrimp allergy. It doesn't make any sense. You're not going to parent your way out of your child having a reaction to a substance that once they put it into their body, they form an addiction. Whereas 9 out of every other 10 kids, they put the same substance in their body and they don't become addicted. It's a luck of the draw kind of thing. And so to make yourself responsible for it is, it's obviously it's a natural human thing to do as a parent. Parents feel guilty just, by the fact that you're a parent, in a lot of things, and second guessing and wishing you would have done things differently.
Screw things up.
For sure. And that may be true, but still none of your screw ups have anything to do with why your kid has a shrimp allergy. And in the same way, none of your screw ups have anything to do with why the action of alcohol on your kid's body is they have alcoholism, right? Or they smoke weed and they really smoke weed versus, the ordinary teen experimentation and natural phases that, comes from just kind of risky teen behavior. Identifying that, of course, is difficult, but going back to what I was saying, just if not only is it's not useful to make yourself guilty for it, it's actually preventing you from doing what would actually be helpful. Because you're
100%.
spending so much time trying to make things right that are kind of irrelevant for dealing with the problem.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how do you know? How do you know you think someone you love is having a substance use issue? Is it a problem? Isn't it a problem? Will they grow out of it? Won't they? What are the questions that you get beleaguered with every day by parents?
Well, it's, funny that you ask in that way, because I'm not going to get parents that are reaching out to me are beyond the point of whether it's a problem or not. They've fully arrived at the problem. But the question might be, is it or isn't it? And what I'm helping parents do and families do is not really focus on you being the person that's going to determine it. It's more about assuming that it is and thinking about it from the fact of if you make it addiction and you're wrong, there's no downside. If you don't put addiction on the list of possibilities of what's going on here and it is addiction, that could have fatal consequences. So if your child, here's the 3 questions that you want to ask yourself, okay? Number 1, do you know for a fact that your child has tried any addictive substances? If that's a yes, do you know for a fact that they've been drunk or high at least once? Now, again, I'm thinking more of like teenage years, right? So if you have a 14-year-old, 15, 16, you know that they've been high or you know that they've been drunk. You know it for a fact because of something that's happened. Well, then you ask yourself the 3rd question, which is, have they experienced any consequences as a result of their substance use? Anything that's even remotely connected to substance use. If you have that, then you have to put the possibility.
What would be?
They get arrested for something that's substance related, or they get suspended from school, or they have a relationship breakup that you suspected was because of, activities that were happening at a party at 1 o'clock in the morning, anything that could even loosely be associated with were substances involved or not. Right. And if they were, that's the kind of thing that raises to the level of your conscious awareness, or should anyway, as a parent, because most teens, believe it or not, right, a lot of them aren't even using substances. So to go back to the first question, it's like many aren't even doing it yet. Then for the ones that do, it's like, are they drunk? Is there anything that has pointed to your daughter having ever been drunk or high? And oftentimes it's like, no, it's not even something that you're consciously aware of that it's happened. But if it raises to the level of consequences, this is what I'm warning parents on, is that the natural tendency would be to shrug that off and say that that's normal teenage behavior, to just kind of like, this is probably a phase and they'll grow out of it. And guess what? You have like an 85% chance of being right. If you're in the 15% that's wrong, again, it has fatal consequences if you just shrug it off. Most kids, even if they drink and even if they get drunk or high or whatever it might be, they're not going to get themselves jammed up with a consequence that's going to be visible, that's going to be like neighborhood aware. Like you're getting a call from the neighbor and saying like, Joey was over here, he hopped in our pool at 2:00 in the morning. He wasn't supposed to be here. What was going on there? And was that normal? But then that he was high because of, something you found, that was visible on his dresser. And, so you put these pieces together and it's time to start paying attention, because like, for instance, what we worked on together, right? It's not like it was rocket science as soon as you became aware and open to the possibility of what was going on. And then you were like, okay, let's follow directions and give this a try. Right? So it's not like hard. In my personal story, my mother never had any conversations with me about having a problem or, that I was doing anything wrong or anything like that. She waited for a moment when I looked like I was particularly emotionally beat up from a night out, and so on a Sunday morning, I came walking in the door and she didn't yell at me. She didn't, like make me a bowl of soup because she saw how sad I looked. She didn't have any details about what happened. She just sees the look on my face and she says, "Would you like to go to a meeting with me?" And I said, okay. So she bypassed all of the like, do I have a problem? Oh, you're an alcoholic. You gotta stop drinking. There wasn't any of like conversations like that. And what was in her control was to connect me to the people who could help me identify for myself that alcoholism was a problem I had. She didn't tell me. She just made the connection. And so for families, it's about influencing that decision. It's about facilitating that connection. You're not going to be the convincer. If I could, like, one thing I like to say often is you're not trying to convince your child that they have a problem. If it gets to the point where you're going to have a conversation where that's necessary, like was necessary in your case, right? I'm convincing them that I'm convinced this is a problem. And now it becomes on them. It's like, okay, well, is it a problem? Is it not? Well, it's like, well, here's all the data we have. Here's all the examples we have. And then they're going to push back against that. But as you have this open dialogue back and forth, it's basically going to arrive at a binary choice, which is I'm either going to get help or I'm going to start to face what continuing to use, despite it getting very uncomfortable because my parents are now very problem aware. Is this going to be worth my continuing to use, or am I going to tap into the truth here because I've been in a lot of pain for a long time anyway?
Yeah. Well, I really want to kind of double click on that, on what you said about that that as a parent, you're just clearing the path for them to get help from someone else rather than the parent, right? Like, I'm not going to convince my kid or be able to tell my kid how to handle the situation or the circumstance. And I think that's a huge leap. It really is. Like, this is out of my control. I'm no longer going to try to fix it myself. To your point about that doesn't make me a bad mom.
Right.
But I think we do end up feeling that way if we don't have the resources to fix our kid's problem. Then the automatic assumption in this society is, well, what are you doing wrong?
Of course.
That's not happening to this kid or that kid or this kid. That is just super powerful. So when you are brought on as an interventionist, like, what is generally the circumstance you find? Like, what would be the sort of, not that any of it is average, but what is the sort of average circumstance? There's been consequences from the use. It's messed up some part of their lives. I'm sure you could be brought in when all hell has way broken loose, or it's sort of, you're still early on.
Yeah. So probably better than 50% of the time, which is the part of the story that I would love to somehow change and crack the marketing code on, like how do you get people to help when it is just smoke instead of waiting for it to be a 5-alarm blaze?
Yeah.
I'm not getting the phone call until it is a 3, 4, or 5-alarm blaze, right? And so at that point, it's there's at least one family member, probably 1 or 2 people removed, right? So it would be like a sister of a mom. So like the aunt is calling me, right?
Uh-huh.
And the aunt is calling me and is no holds barred about what the problem is going on with her nephew, right? But her sister isn't quite bought in. So now I have to work my way from the aunt to mom to dad, and then get everybody on the same page and kind of educate everybody on what's really going on here. Essentially have them all arrive at the same conclusions. So like what we've been talking about here right now, there's no downside to treating this like it's addiction. Also going through the case history and kind of like pulling examples from them and having them link it on their own to this is addictive behavior. This isn't ordinary, and showing them that it's not ordinary. And then to your point, kind of rolling back the BS that they might have heard because they have to want it, they have to be ready, they have to hit bottom, that ultimately there's nothing that they can do until they decide to get help, is a lot of misinformation.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think that was I kept waiting for my kid to ask for help, like to hit bottom and say, I'm ready. And I struggle, it's his story. This is something I go back and forth with this. But he was not healthy, right? I mean, it was a scary situation. So tell me, like, unpack it for me. What is that? Oh, they'll hit bottom. How do you, and we had a lot of resistance because he hadn't hit bottom. So it was a very, very arduous process to talk him into at least a first step. So where do you stand on that whole thing? I know you talk about it a lot.
Yeah. Well, again, by definition, the fastest 2-word definition for addiction is can't stop. So if someone can't stop.
The fastest 2-word definition of addiction is can't stop.
And so a lot of wasted time and energy goes into efforts to get them to stop when they can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so then people arrive at the conclusion that, well, no one can help them because everything we've tried hasn't worked. Everything you've tried hasn't worked because it was never going to work. You're dealing with addiction, which means the train doesn't have any brakes. The train has left the station. The train is rumbling down the tracks and it can't stop. They need to be extracted from the train in a moment where they're going to be receptive to do it. And so that's where the metaphor gets a little bit extreme when you think about it in that way. But it is going to be about like, hey, that was pretty scary back there. Maybe it's time for you to take the help and the offer of support that we have here. We can get you off of this ride. You don't have to go down these tracks anymore. You can continue to do this, but wouldn't it be better to do this? And then you're going to have this dialogue back and forth, and they're going to say, no, I can stop whenever I want to. And you're not getting into trying to convince them about that. You know that they don't have any brakes. They don't. they're not going to know that they didn't have any breaks until they're already receiving the help. So what I say often in, kind of response to all of those misconceptions is that there's a difference between getting sober and staying sober. And when someone is in active addiction, they can't get themselves sober. And then you'll have all of the people that want to talk about like, yeah, but my Uncle Larry, he stopped cold turkey and he was this and that, and people want to get into all of those stories. And inevitably, if you dig around long enough, and nobody cares to do this, I'm the only person that cares to do this because I'm an interventionist and it's something I find fascinating and interesting. So I dive into these details. Anybody that I have spoken to who is in recovery inevitably has some kind of precipitating external factor or motivation that had it not happened when it did, they would not have gotten sober the day that they did. It wasn't because they sought help. It wasn't because they saw the 1-800 number flash by on the commercial and then frantically wrote it down to call the rehab. Oh my God, I need help. That's not what's happening. It's like, do you need help for alcohol or drugs? An alcoholic or an addict says nope and keeps it moving. It's like you're talking to someone else. You're not talking to me. So in my own personal story, I didn't go to my mother and seek help. And I knew there was a place to go for help. And I was I was suicidal. Now, suicidal in an alcoholic sense. I wasn't really like planning anything, but I didn't want to wake up. And so I could certainly have the feeling of saying I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I didn't want to live this way anymore. And I woke up on countless mornings saying, I'm not going to drink or do drugs anymore. And I promised myself in the quiet of my own mind, I'm not going to do this again. And I did it over and over and over again. And still, knowing there was a place to go for help, I never said anything to anybody because it never occurred to me, because the conclusion I'm always arriving at is I'm fine. I don't have a problem. And next time will be different. And next time will be different is something that the streets are littered with that conclusion. People are on the sidewalks now believing it's going to get better and next time will be different. And this isn't so bad. And it's like a delusional optimism that people in addiction can have, so that they can shrug off the circumstances of their life, because what else are you going to do? It's insane to come up with a reasonable expectation for why I'm living on the sidewalk. So I have to come up with something irrational.
Yeah. So just in terms of what's going on with young people, adolescents, young adults, I mean, what are you seeing as is the rate of addiction increasing? Do you think that the sort of all the social media and anxiety, depression, isolation, are you seeing these as predictors or sort of the fuel? Because, you give a 2-year-old an iPad and they start scrolling through and all of a sudden you're stimulating all of this dopamine. Like, what are you seeing?
Yeah. So I might have a contrarian opinion here on this, right? Because of my understanding of addiction. What I would say is that we're likely seeing an onset of more mental health concerns than more addiction per se, right? So because addiction, by and large, if you were to follow the National Home Survey on Drug Use and Health, those numbers don't change. It's relatively, like, based on the substance, anywhere from 10 to 25% based on whatever particular substance it is that you're looking at, right? So the suffering that can come from, like, kind of being exposed to some things that can become, like addictive. But so this is the thing that's contrarian. If you were to look in a bar in a college town, and you're able to look and say, okay, here's a bunch of, it's Friday night and there's a whole bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-olds in the bar, and there's 500 people in there. And I were to tell you there's 50 alcoholics. Which ones are they? You're not going to be able to tell just by looking in the window, because everybody looks like they're alcoholics.
Right.
Right? Because you're in a college town and the thing to do is drink, and everybody there is doing that. And so, and that's just what's happening at the bar. And then you can start to have a conversation about, well, how many people are in the dorm room studying and how many people. So whether it's like more or less, like, I don't know about like how you get into that kind of conversation, other than to just kind of point out that most people who use addictive substances do not become addicted to them. There's more people who are dependent, and then there's an even larger category of people who use substances who don't even form dependence. So if you were to look at, 10 people, about 5 of them are normal substance users. 3 to 4 of them, percentage-wise, are going to maybe have dependence at various different lengths of time. And that's what points to, like, my answer to your question. Like, they could be feeling all sorts of, social anxiety and, whatever experiences they might have had because of, social media exposure and the anxieties and just depression and the pressures of life and whatever traumas they might have experienced. And that, using substances right now is helping them cope. And it could look like addiction, but it's not. And then when you have people tell a story and they say, oh, I quit cold turkey, or now they're an influencer on social media and they say, like, I did dry January and I just decided to just keep it going, Well, oftentimes, like, those weren't necessarily people with addictions from the start. And so their ability so put it like this, going back to our train analogy, it's like they always had brakes. They just weren't using them.
Yeah. 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 They can't stop. I really like that
But
definition.
the people that are dependent can stop. They're just not.
Right.
They're just rumbling down the tracks because they're upset, they're in grief, they're traumatized, they're whatever. And so they're doing risky stuff right now. But the moment it becomes like, you need to slow down. And if it really strikes them, they can pump the brakes because they have brakes, and then they can stop or slow down. So they never lose the ability to do that. But they look a lot like the addicted people. And it's important to know the difference, because the addicted people can't pump the brakes. They don't have them.
Yeah. That's a great distinction. And so I have to ask you, because, I've been in this world for a while now and had a lot of exposure since you and I even connected. What do you see going on with weed?
Yeah, it's become more acceptable, and the attitude is become like laissez-faire. And you have a lot of parents who, unfortunately, because of their own weed usage also, they might have a little bit of an acceptability to it that they shouldn't. Like, it should be treated in the very same way that alcohol is treated. I'm always kind of surprised, but not, when I hear from a parent who calls me and says, my child is 16 or 17 or 18 and they're dealing with this or that or whatever, and that they've been smoking weed, and the parent is aware that they're smoking weed and is not even challenged by it. They're calling me because they suspect that they're using cocaine now, or they're calling me because they think they're using opiates. And then I, get a history, and it's like, oh yeah, he's been smoking weed, but that's because he has social anxiety. And it's just like, whoa. We can't normalize a 15-year-old smoking weed for social anxiety. We just can't do that. It needs to be treated. It's not legal anywhere for anyone under 21. in the entirety of the United States. Okay. So treat it the very same way that you treat alcohol, and have a conversation with your child, and have it early and have it often. It doesn't have to be one big whammy conversation, but it needs to be initiated by saying, like, under no circumstances is it okay for you to use any substances such as alcohol or weed or cigarettes, vaping, no chewables, no edibles, like nothing until you are of legal age to do so. Use the legal system to your advantage in that way to like have that conversation.
Yeah. And one of my questions also about weed is that the potency of it.
Right.
And it isn't what it was. It's not our dad's weed.
For sure. Yeah. It's dangerous. It's dangerous, but it's, the reason I approach it in that way is that it's always been dangerous for a teenage brain. So if you just start there, it's accelerated. Now it's like we have the fentanyl of weed. Today,
totally.
And some weed might have fentanyl mixed into it, which is just, another kind of dangerous aspect to this where, you really want to have conversations with your kids about not using substances at all until they're of legal age to do so. And then use that as a jumping off place for future conversations.
And that is, not to go off on that rabbit hole, but that's kind of where I am with technology and social media.
Oh, yeah.
We know how harmful it is, and yet we're convinced that we need to give our kid the equivalent of a bottle of vodka at like 8 years old, right? But you can use it because we don't have collective bargaining power as parents to say, well, that's illegal. It's illegal for you to, you remember porn magazines? I mean, it was illegal. You couldn't have them. Kids stole it from their father or whatever from under the mattress, and you could stand behind that. And now that's such a big thing to me, to how can this be happening? Like kids, we know how detrimental this is to mental health, to your point about there are more mental health issues. So I want to just, I want to be respectful of your time. And, so what are the top three? I know that you said this, like, can't stop. There have been consequences to the use, et cetera. What are three guidelines or points that you would offer parents where it's very, very clear that they are in a position where they could take action?
Okay. So on a scale of 1 to 10, you are both at an 8, 9, 10 of worry and concern, and also able to rate whatever the latest consequence was that's related to their substance use. So, for example, if they've been arrested for a DWI, that's a 10-10, and you should be taking action at that point. That should look like a definitive guided conversation, because if you don't have a conversation with them, that will just be another missed opportunity to get them the help that they need. Each consequence is an opportunity. I remember speaking with a mom who, again, situation was like, I forget who it was a friend. A friend was telling me about her friend's son. And so I wind up getting in touch with the mom. And I speak with her at length for probably 2 or 3 different phone calls. And then I never get to her husband, because her husband is the minimizing type. He is minimizing the problem. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. And I had left her with this. I was like, okay, well, if he gets arrested or is hospitalized or something, then that's going to be an opportunity to get him help. And not at the time, she told me this later, right? She took almost offense to me saying it in that way, but she kept that to herself. Well, 5 months or 7 months later, when he got into a car accident and he was now in the hospital, it clicked. Oh, this is my opportunity.
Yeah.
And she called me, and within 10 minutes, we had someone on the phone with him who was able to get past all of the resistance that she just had trying to convince him to get help.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that person, I had him speak to a friend of mine, Danny, who got on the phone with him and was able to use this as the leverage to get him into a treatment program, and thus began his recovery journey. If that doesn't happen, do you think he's walking out of the hospital to go to an AA meeting on his own? Or to check himself into rehab? That's not happening. That's not happening because of the nature of addiction itself. So it's recognizing that these types of things are going to happen, and unfortunately, they're not going to stop happening unless someone connects them to the helpful resource. They're not going to do it on their own. It's like the most extreme version of, if you've ever seen the movie Rocky IV, there's a scene where Apollo Creed is in the ring and he's getting pummeled by the Russian. I mean, the Russian is just, like killing him in the ring.
Yeah.
He's just destroying him. And Rocky is holding the towel. And all Rocky has to do is throw the towel in. But Rocky's not doing it because Apollo is looking at him and saying, don't throw in the towel. Don't throw in the towel. You're hoping that your addicted loved one is going to give you the go-ahead and say, throw in the towel.
Oh, 100%.
They are not. They're not going to do it. They're going to die in the ring instead. And not only that, it's even they're convinced as they're getting pummeled, I'm going to beat this thing next time. That wasn't so bad. As they're getting iced up in the corner, okay, we got this. That's what's going on in their brain. So you have to throw in the towel for them. And what that looks like is seizing these opportunities as they present themselves. And, because if Rocky throws in the towel, Apollo lives. Yeah, is Apollo pissed at first? Sure. But that's worth it because he's alive instead.
Right. That is that's such a great metaphor. I did that for so long. I'm like, you're going to throw in the towel, aren't you? I know you are, because you're sure not letting me do it. That is so powerful. So how, you are just such a gift, Chris, and your skill level. And I think just kind of your courage and commitment, because I know you deal with a lot of stuff every day and a lot of stories, and I'm sure some of them are really, really tragic and sad, and you've probably forestalled many of those stories with the work that you do. But if somebody wanted to find out more about what you do and what your resources are and how to work with you, what would they look for?
Visit whyintervention.com. So that's W-H-Y.
Intervention.
Yep, whyintervention.com. I have a bevy of free resources there that I want you to read through. And I'm not even looking to capture emails or anything. Like, you just click on it and read through the stuff, and you can start to utilize those materials. I have the connected response method, which is the approach that I kind of insinuated in our conversation just now. That will be free. So if you visit the website and go to the free resources, you'll be able to get access to that also. That's a free mini course with scripts and everything on how to have the conversation. And then beyond that, it's like, as you start to move up the scale of what's going on, ideally, again, where my heart is kind of changing the paradigm on how we deal with this. And I want you as a parent to deal with this when it's still smoke. Like if your house is on fire, you don't spend any time at all denying that it's a fire.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be a 5-alarm blaze for you to call for help. You call at the first signs of smoke. And so, if you listen to my podcast, the Why Intervention podcast, if you take my story to heart, there are so many stories of people who are addicted in their teens. It's not the Bowery being on the street takes 30 years to get to. We're addicted right now. And there's a possibility that all things could look great for your loved one and they could be addicted right now. And And so if you just make use of the resources, many of them free, and if you need more help, just reach out. We're there to help.
So it's whyintervention.com, and you are this unique bird. I didn't find a lot of you, an interventionist. If someone is meeting those criteria that you laid out, it's a really, really great resource. And you're so generous with your time and your knowledge and information. So thank you so much, Chris Doyle. I have a feeling I'll have you back on if you'll jump back on.
Absolutely.
We can
sure.
maybe have like a Q&A, because I know that of all of the people I've spoken to, all of these experts, I get the most questions about you.
Oh, wow. Well, I would be happy. I would love to do a Q&A. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Thanks so much, Chris.
You're very welcome. Great to see you. Talk to you soon.